World War II. When the world turned into a battlefield. World War II wasn't just a war. It was the moment humanity almost tore itself apart. From 1939 to 1945, over 100 million soldiers from 30 countries fought across Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. Cities burned, oceans turned into graveyards, and entire populations vanished. It began when Nazi Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939. Britain and France declared war, believing it would be quick. It wasn't. German tanks crushed Europe, while bombs rained on London during the Blitz. In the East, Hitler broke his pact with the Soviet Union and launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest land invasion in history with over 3 million German soldiers. Meanwhile, on December 7th, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, dragging the U.S. into the war. Battles spread to deserts in North Africa, jungles in Southeast Asia, and remote Pacific islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Then came humanity's darkest moment, the Holocaust. 6 million Jews murdered in concentration camps like Auschwitz. By 1945, the war ended with atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, leaving cities reduced to ash and shadows burned into walls. Over 70 to 85 million people died. Nations collapsed, borders changed. The world was never the same again. World War I. The war to end all wars. World War I started with a gunshot, but it ended by reshaping the entire planet. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was assassinated in Sarajevo. That single bullet triggered alliances, and suddenly all of Europe was at war. By 1914, over 65 million soldiers were mobilized. But this wasn't a fast-moving war. It turned into muddy trenches stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland. Soldiers lived with rats, disease, and constant shelling. Machine guns, barbed wire, poison gas. Death became industrial. Battles like Verdun and the Somme killed over 700,000 men in months, often for just a few miles of land. In 1917, the United States joined the war, tipping the balance against Germany and its allies. By the time the war ended in November 1918, more than 17 million people were dead. Empires collapsed. Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Russia all fell apart. But instead of peace, the Treaty of Versailles left Germany humiliated, broke, and angry. That anger didn't disappear. It grew, fueled nationalism, and helped create someone named Adolf Hitler. So the war to end all wars didn't end anything. It just set the stage for something even worse. The Mongol Conquests Empire, built on bones, steppe winds, horse hooves, and burning cities. That's what the world saw when the Mongols arrived. In the early 1200s, a man named Temujin, later known as Genghis Khan, united the Mongol tribes of Central Asia. In just a few decades, his armies built the largest land empire in human history, stretching from China to Europe. The Mongols didn't fight like anyone else. They moved fast on horseback, firing arrows at full speed, striking before enemies even knew they were there. Cities that surrendered survived. Cities that resisted were erased. Nishapur, Persia, 1.7 million people reportedly killed. Baghdad, 1258. The capital of the Islamic world burned. The Tigris River turned black with ink from destroyed books and red with blood. Their tactics were brutal but strategic. They used psychological warfare, spreading terror so strong that some cities surrendered without a fight. Behind them were fields of skulls, yet along their roads came trade, ideas, and a connected world. The Silk Road reopened under Mongol protection. By the time the empire peaked, over 40 million people were dead. But it also unintentionally helped spread the Black Plague from Asia to Europe through its trade routes, killing even more. The Mongols didn't just conquer land. They reshaped continents with fire, fear, and iron. The Napoleonic Wars. One man versus all of Europe. Europe thought the French Revolution was the problem, until Napoleon Bonaparte took over. By 1804, he crowned himself Emperor of France and decided Europe wasn't big enough unless it was under his control. What followed from 1803 to 1815 became one of the bloodiest military campaigns in history. Napoleon's army, the Grande Armée, was unstoppable at first. Over 600,000 soldiers, disciplined and fast. He crushed Austria at Austerlitz, 1805, defeated Prussia in Jena, 1806, and even reshaped the map of Europe. Kings fell, borders moved, and France ruled the continent. But his biggest mistake came in 1812, invading Russia. Napoleon marched into Moscow, but the Russians burned their own city to destroy supplies. Winter arrived. Temperatures dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius. Starvation, frostbite, and Russian attacks wiped out almost the entire army. Of 600,000 men, only around 100,000 made it back. Europe struck back. At the Battle of Leipzig, 1813, Napoleon was defeated. In 1815, he tried one last comeback. Waterloo. He lost. For good this time. By the end, over 4 million people were dead. Nations broke, alliances formed, and Europe entered a new era. Napoleon's dream of domination died. But his wars redrew the world. The Taiping Rebellion, a civil war. Deadlier than most world wars. In the mid-1800s, China became the stage for one of the deadliest wars in human history, and most people outside Asia barely know it happened. It began when a failed scholar named Hong Xiuquan claimed he was the younger brother of Jesus Christ, sent to destroy demons and rebuild China. Millions believed him. From 1850 to 1864, Hong led the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, a rebel state based in Nanjing. They banned alcohol, gambling, and foot-binding. They promised equality and land for peasants. But to the ruling Qing dynasty, they were a threat that had to be crushed. War exploded across southern China. Cities switched hands, villages were slaughtered. The rebels built an army of nearly 2 million soldiers, while the Qing used foreign weapons and Western-trained troops to fight back. The fighting was brutal. Mass starvation, burning cities, and executions on both sides. In 1864, Qing forces retook Nanjing. The Taiping leaders died or committed suicide. The city was left in ruins. By the end, an estimated 20 to 30 million people were dead, more than World War I. Farmlands were destroyed, rivers filled with bodies, and southern China was left in chaos. This wasn't just a civil war. It was a nightmare that reshaped China forever. The 30 Years' War, Religion, Fire, and Famine. 17th century Europe turned into hell on earth during the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648. It started in the Holy Roman Empire, modern-day Germany, when Protestant nobles threw 2 Catholic officials out of a castle window in Prague. That moment, called the Defenestration of Prague, lit the fuse to one of Europe's darkest wars. What began as a fight between Catholics and Protestants turned into a full-scale power struggle involving nearly every major European nation: France, Spain, Sweden, Denmark, Austria, and more. Armies marched from town to town, not just fighting soldiers but burning farms, looting villages, and starving civilians. The war wasn't just battles. It was slow suffering. Soldiers lived off the land, stealing food, destroying crops, and spreading disease. Entire regions starved. In some German states, up to 40% of the population died. Villages disappeared from maps, fields turned to wasteland. One of the worst moments came during the sack of Magdeburg in 1631, where over 20,000 civilians were massacred and the city burned for 3 days. Survivors called it the Magdeburg Wedding, where death married the city. After 30 years, the war ended with the Peace of Westphalia. Europe's borders were redrawn, and religious tolerance became law. But millions were dead, and Central Europe was ruined for generations. The Korean War, the forgotten war that never really ended. In 1950, the Korean peninsula exploded. After World War II, Korea was split in half. The Soviet-backed North and the US-backed South. On June 25, 1950, North Korean troops crossed the 38th parallel with 75,000 soldiers trying to unify Korea by force. The North almost won. They stormed through Seoul and pushed South Korean and U.S. forces down to a tiny corner called the Pusan Perimeter. But then the U.S. launched a surprise counterattack at Incheon, turning the tide. The war flipped. Now the UN forces pushed north, almost to the Chinese border. That's when China entered with over 300,000 troops. Endless waves of soldiers, brutal winter temperatures, and hillside battles like Chosin Reservoir turned the war into a frozen nightmare. Soldiers froze to death in their trenches. Bodies couldn't be buried because the ground was ice. By 1953, both sides were stuck in trench warfare again, just like World War I. An armistice was signed on July 27, 1953, but no peace treaty. The war never officially ended. Over 3 million people died. Cities were erased. Families were split across a border that still exists today. The DMZ, one of the most dangerous borders in the world. The Vietnam War, Superpowers versus Jungle Fighters. Vietnam wasn't just a war. It was a test of how far a superpower would go, and how far a small country would fight back. It started as a struggle between North Vietnam, communist, and South Vietnam, US-backed, in the late 1950s, but by 1965, American troops were fully involved. The US had helicopters, jets, napalm, and over 500,000 soldiers at its peak. The North had Viet Cong guerrillas, underground tunnels, jungle camouflage, and an iron determination to outlast their enemy. The land itself became a weapon: thick jungles, booby traps made from sharpened bamboo, and ambushes at night. One of the most brutal battles was Tet Offensive, 1968, when North Vietnamese forces attacked over 100 cities at once. Militarily, the U.S. pushed them back. But psychologically, America was broken. People questioned the war. Protests filled streets back home. Villages burned, civilians died. Toxic chemicals like Agent Orange destroyed forests and poisoned land for generations. By 1973, U.S. troops withdrew. In 1975, Saigon fell. North Vietnam won. The war was over. More than 3 million people died. America lost 58,000 soldiers. The world realized even the strongest armies can lose to patience, terrain, and belief. If you want more stories like this, hit subscribe, drop a comment with what war or tragedy I should cover next, and don't forget to stay curious but never forget history.